So for those who do not know, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is one of my favorite young players to watch in the NBA. I think his game is very smooth, and I think that he's one of the better young players in the league with a whole lot of potential, as you can tell by the title. But I don't think a lot of people understand just how good of a player Shai Gilgeous can become in the near future. Yes, I did not say distant future, but the near future. I think the time has arrived for him to have a breakout season next year. But before we get started with this video, I'd like to let you guys know that the recent episode of the Overtime podcast just dropped on the next channel. Make sure you check that out. Cards should be on the screen. Links are down below in the description box. But without further ado, let's get back to talking about my boy Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Shai Gilgeous over the past season improved on multiple aspects of his game, but for the time being, let's just talk about the statistical improvements that he showed over the last year. This past season, he upped his averages in points, rebounds, and assists, as he averaged 19 points, 6 rebounds, and 3 assists, while shooting 47% from the field, 34 to 35% from behind the arc, and 81% from the free throw line. Now his efficiency stayed relatively the same. His 3-point percentage took a little bit of a dip, but considering the fact that he upped his attempts from 1.7 last year with the Clippers to 3.6 this year, I would say the amount of attempts increase kind of makes up for the fact that his percentage did drop 2%. And to be honest, I'm a big Shai Gilgeous fan because of his time in Kentucky, and I knew his capabilities coming into the league, but I do believe that his time with the Clippers kind of hindered what he could do due to the fact that he had to share the ball with other players such as Landry Shamet, Lou Williams, Patrick Beverley, Tobias Harris, Gallinari, essentially just a multitude of guys that needed the ball in their hands to be effective. So you weren't really going to see Shai on full display. And I even think this past season you could somewhat make that argument as well, as he had to share the ball with Gallinari again, Dennis Schroeder, Chris Paul, and obviously the GOAT Lukas Dort. So even this past year with OKC, we weren't really able to see Shai Gilgeous on full display due to the fact that he had to play within the offense and there were other shot creators around him that needed the ball to be effective. So when it comes to this year, there's no more Gallinari as he went to Atlanta. Chris Paul has been traded. Dennis Schroeder has been traded to the Lakers. So now it's time for Shai to be the #1 option on this team. And I believe that he will live up to the expectations and actually become an efficient 20-point per game scorer this next upcoming season. Now I know a lot of people are going to hear that and say, what, how can you say that when this was a guy that literally benefited due to having shot creators around him? The defensive attention wasn't solely on him. He doesn't have Chris Paul anymore. And to that, I can somewhat agree with some of those claims, but I do think people need to do a little bit more digging when it comes to Shai's game, because he is far more than a guy that benefits from having people around him. He can actually create his own shot rather consistently and efficiently. He's a very crafty scorer with the ability to score on all 3 levels. The only thing that he really struggles with consistency on is his ability to shoot from behind the arc, but other than that, he's a great mid-range shooter. He actually shot 48% on his mid-range jumpers. As a finisher, he knows how to use his body well by attacking the basket and scoring in a very acrobatic way due to his length, and he's already got somewhat of a signature move, as for those who watch him know he is a master when it comes to the finger roll, as he shot 58% on all of his finger roll attempts. He's very good when it comes to that shot, and even though sometimes he can settle for it a little bit too much, because that's just what young players do, they get caught up in what works for them, but I think that next year, due to the fact that he's going to have more defensive attention on him, he'll have to adapt, and it might be a little bit of a struggle, but I do believe he will eventually catch on and become a little bit more diverse when it comes to his finishing ability around the rim. But another thing about Shai's game that a lot of people have pointed out is the fact that he isn't that great of a playmaker, and to that I can agree 100%, because over the course of his short career so far, Shai has not really been that great of a playmaker. Now, I do think a lot of people need to understand he's never been put in the role or position to be the primary playmaker of a team. So I think people need to take that into consideration. When he was in LA, like I said earlier, he had other guys that could play make for him, a multitude of guys that could play make for him. And now being in Oklahoma City over the past season, he had Chris Paul and Dennis Schroeder, who are better playmakers than him, and considering the fact that he is 6'6", 6'5" with that long ass wingspan, it's better for him to play the 2 guard anyways and to play off of Chris Paul and Dennis Schroeder in some of those small ball guard lineups. Hell, even in some games he would actually play some small forward due to his length. Being on the court with Dennis Schroeder and Chris Paul at the same time, he actually played more small forward this past year than he played point guard. So I think people need to understand that his roles on the team affect the fact that you don't really see him playmaking that much on a night-to-night basis. And I don't really like to take players' quotes too heavy because a lot of them just be saving face. But when Shai actually was asked about his playmaking ability and his ability to run the point guard position, he came out and straight up said that he wants to be a point guard. So he wants that role to initiate offense, and I definitely believe that if he's given the opportunity, he can improve on it. A lot of players in the league that came into the NBA were not great playmakers right off the bat. They had to develop into that kind of player, and I think being behind Chris Paul this past season has shown him a lot when it comes to that side of the ball. So I definitely think next year, with the opportunity presented towards him to be the primary playmaker of the offense, I think he will thrive. One thing about him that people have expressed concern is his 3-point shot, because he isn't that consistent of a shooter, and I will admit next year it will become even more urgent for him to become a better 3-point shooter due to the fact that the spacing will shrink on the court with the loss of Chris Paul and Dennis Schroeder, as well as Gallinari in the front court. So I do expect him to work on his game and improve as a 3-point shooter, because 34 to 35% on around 3 to 4 attempts, that's not really going to cut it moving forward. He has to be able to improve that to at least league average on a respectable amount of attempts, and I do believe he will be able to do that. 34 to 35% on around 4 to 5 attempts, I don't think that's undoable for a guy like Shai, especially considering that last year in the playoffs he actually shot really well from behind the arc. So he does have the capabilities to become at least an average 3-point shooter. Now when it comes to the other aspects such as defense, rebounding, he's a really good rebounder, obviously due to his size. And when it comes to the defensive side of the ball, he's far from an elite defender, but I do believe he's relatively decent. I think he's kind of average on that side of the ball, and I think a lot of that just has to do with his size, because he does have a 6'11" wingspan, which is just insane for a guy that's 6'5". So it's kind of impossible for him to be trash on that side of the ball. But I also think he's been relatively protected when it comes to his defensive inefficiencies being exploited by opponents due to the fact that he's played in backcourts with good to elite defenders such as Patrick Beverley and Chris Paul. And next year, with Lukas Dort getting more minutes, hopefully Dort becomes a better offensive player if that's the case. But I think defensively, he's going to be put in the exact position that he was last year, and might even benefit him a little bit more with more experience. I assume he'll get better on defense, and to have Dort in the backcourt with him, because I assume Dort will start. And if that's the case, I definitely think that his defensive responsibilities won't be that high, especially considering that he's going to take on the scoring load and playmaking load. You definitely don't want to overtask him when it comes to his responsibilities. But overall, I think he's solid on the defensive side of the ball, and next year I expect him to improve primarily when it comes to his off-ball defense, considering that Dort is going to take on the on-ball responsibility. So combine that with his great wingspan, he should have the potential to be a great off-ball defender. But in conclusion, when it comes to Shai Gilgeous' game as a whole, he has the potential to be one of the better scorers in the league next year. I could see his stat line being around 22 to 21 points per game, 6 to 5 rebounds, 4 to 5 assists, and he could shoot relatively decent shooting splits of 44 to 45% from the field, 34 to 35% from behind the arc on around 4 to 5 attempts. And I also expect him to shoot 80 to 81% from the free throw line, because he is a really solid free throw shooter. So when it comes to his overall game and play, maybe he can actually put himself in the all-star mix. I don't expect him to make the actual team, but if he does have the season that I do project him to have, I do think he will get a good percentage of the votes. He might even be considered as snubbed, because you know every year you have those players. But regardless, you guys get my point. Shai will have a breakout season. I expect him to be solidified as a future star, if not a star next year. And though I don't expect the Oklahoma City Thunder's win and loss column to be that great because we all know they're obviously tanking, I do expect him to continue to solidify himself as a cornerstone of that franchise. But without further ado, that concludes this video, you guys. Let me know your opinions on Shai Gilgeous next year. What do you think he's going to be able to accomplish over the next season? Let me know in the comment section down below. Also, do not forget to hit that subscribe button if you enjoyed this channel and push the bell for post notifications. Check out the Overtime podcast as well as my articles. The links for all of that are down below in the description box. Y'all stay safe and have a great day. I'm out. Peace.